and your cameras turned off during the talk to lessen any possible interference. There will be an opportunity to turn on your cameras during the Q&A at the end if you wish. So we're really delighted to be hosting an international panel this evening. In fact, more international than we thought, as we have panelists from Helsinki, Mexico City, and Vancouver this evening. So we have Pontus Kayanda and Daniella Perez, who will both be exploring themes of ecology and activism in Metzgers oeuvre. Unfortunately, Matthew Copeland, who had hoped to join us, is now unable to do so due to a change in his travel plans, but we hope to reschedule his talk for later. The format of tonight's event is that I will introduce our first speaker, Pontus, in a moment, and he will give his presentation. And then we'll introduce our second speaker, Daniella, and she will give her presentation. We'll then hand over to Nicola Baird and Leanne Dimterko, the exhibition's co-curators, and they will initiate a brief panel discussion between the speakers. Please note that the chat function will be open throughout tonight's event, and messages will go to Nicola and Leanne directly. Then after the discussion, they will fit in as many of your questions and comments as they can in the available time at the end. And then Nikki will close the event with a notification of the next talk. And so to the first of our two distinguished speakers this evening. Pontus Kayanda is a Helsinki-based curator and writer. He was formerly the public art manager in Auckland, New Zealand, a professor at Ewha University in Seoul, South Korea, and director of Trondheim Art Museum and Sørlandets Kunstmuseum, both in Norway. He met Gustav Metzger in 2002, and they collaborated on several occasions, including curating exhibitions Gustav Metzger work at Lund Konsthall in 2006 in Sweden, which traveled to Zaketa National Gallery in Warsaw in 2007, and of which he was a co-curator. He also worked on Gustav Metzger's retrospective Act or Perish, which traveled between Poland, Norway, and Spain between 2014 and 16. And now over to you, Pontus.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, Nicola, and all the staff at Ben-Ure Museum. And thank you, Leanne, for kindly inviting me to this occasion. I'm really excited to hear the presentation by Nicola Perez on Gustav Metzger from an activist and environmentalist perspective. I will, though, touch on a seemingly marginal work in the vast oeuvre of Gustav Metzger, his garbage bag, a plastic bag containing waste from a tailoring shop in Soho, London. Over time, this work has grown on me while I started to understand its meaning to Gustav Metzger at the time. Next frame, please. This is maybe the most well-known image and activity of Gustav Metzger, his acid painting demonstration at South Bank in London in 1961, then under development to Cultural Centre for London. This was a launch for a wider audience of his auto-destructive art, soon to be followed by his ideas on auto-creative art and on machine art. Next. We also know him as a writer of manifestos and strongly but pregnantly worded statements. We know him as an activist and environmentalist. In his own words, a militant. He was not only an anti-fascist, but also one who tried, through his own painful experience, to understand the rise and impact of fascism. We know him as someone who moved on the edge of contemporary art practices. Some of us knew him as a very special friend, extremely loyal, but always, first of all, committed to his artistic work and legacy. Next. I was happy enough to know and work with Gustav Metzger for more than 15 years. As mentioned, we met by chance at the Baltic inauguration in 2002, having in common that neither of us were invited to the opening itself. On the banks of Tyne, this old man pulled, out of his plastic bags, a copy of his catalogue from the Oxford MoMA, and I was hooked. A few years later, in 2005, I produced a 20-minute documentary on his work for Swedish TV. Next. And the following year, sorry, next slide, thank you. The following year, in 2006, I curated the exhibition Gustav Metzger work at the Lund Kunsthall in Sweden, an exhibition where all key aspects of his work was present, except for his liquid crystal projections, including the final realization of his work Karba, original plan for the 1972 Documenta, but never realized. Next. Between 2014 and 16, I had the privilege to curate his retrospective at 3 venues in Poland, Norway, and finally Spain. This time, also his early paintings, drawings, and archival documentation were included. At that time, Gustav could not travel anymore, but the exhibition developed through conversations directly and with digital media. Next. Finally, in 2016, his work Kill the Cars was included in an outdoor media art project I curated in Seoul, South Korea. So that's our collaborations, apart from meeting pretty regularly during all these years. Next. You probably know the outline of Metzger's early life, being born in Nuremberg in Germany in 1926, a child to Polish Jews and soon to experience the consequences of the Holocaust. He and his brother Mendel, and before them 2 sisters, were saved in the last minute before World War II broke, but parents and an older brother perished together with numerous relatives. Next. Now Orphans. Gustav and Mendel formed an early alliance and together pursued artistic careers after the war ended. Together they studied sculpture and drawing in Cambridge, and then moved on to London, studying at the Sir John Cass Institute and after that the Borough Polytechnics, where they had crucial impressions from their teacher David Bomberg. Next. Mendel dropped out from the art educations after some years and became a specialist of Hebrew illuminated manuscripts. Gustav focused on painting. Next. This is how he remembers his first meeting with Bomberg. So I remember walking into the life room, and there was a small man who looked sort of unpossessing. Metzger, it was David Bomberg, but within a few weeks, one realized that this was not an ordinary person. He was charismatic, had enormous experience, and he was, I think, a great artist. Other artists studying at the same time at the Borough Polytechnics were Leon Kossoff and Frank Auerbach, both also from the Jewish diaspora in London. Next. Next slide, please. Bomberg was one of few British modernists of importance who had direct impressions from the Italian futurism. His approach meant a lot. He became a mentor and also very much a father figure to Metzger. I was introduced to drawing that was completely different to what I had been doing in Cambridge, where he studied before, which had involved following the outline of the figure to make a realistic interpretation. Next. Bomberg said, "Forget about that stuff. Go for the structure, go for the center and use the full weight of your body." That was the beginning of my move towards the end result, towards dealing with the central salient points of the figure, rather than with the detail, going to the heart of the matter. That's Bomberg. Next. Bomberg, who had learned from the futurist strategy of writing manifestos, had a penchant for strong statements. Together with some of the students, he formed a group exhibiting yearly called the Borough Group or the Borough Botteggia. He spoke about the spirit of the mass. And this was a concept that related more with the method than the exact impression on the canvas. To quote from a manifesto, we have said that our search is toward the spirit in the mass. Many people have asked us for a further definition. Words cannot give it. The answer lies in the content of the painting. That is our purpose. Our interest lies more in the mass than in the parts, more in movement than in the static, more in the plastic than in the decorative. Identical objects no longer yield the same experience. Our awareness is both of sensation and direction. Next. And further developed by a co-student of Metzger's. The spirit in the mass is that animating principle found in all nature, its vibrant meaning, not simply the sheer brute physicality of the object. Structure did not mean anatomical structure or geometrical reduction. It was a unique image or metaphor in which experience of the spirit of the mass found embodiment. Next. So this painting, the Antwerp model, might be one good example of how Metzger moved into much more physical expression and much more into the sort of massive manifestation of form, and at the same time expressing more of a movement in the making than working with details of the painting. Next. This is how Metzger stated it himself. Let me tell you briefly of my experience of painting. Just after the war, I was in the Tate Gallery with my teacher, David Bomberg. He remarked that I was dissatisfied with painting and asked what sort of painting I was after. I was unable to give a coherent answer. All I knew was that I had to be extremely fast and intense. About 10 years later, I saw Pollock's drip paintings. They came nearest to that conception of painting I had in 1946. And it's important to note how much he stresses speed and intensity, and also to maybe connect that to the heritage Bomberg had from the Italian futurists, and how that transpired also into the works of Gustav Metzger. Next. The closeness between teacher and student came to a brutal end in 1953. Metzger had objected to the way Bomberg pursued a group exhibition with the Borough Group and resigned from his task as the chair of the exhibition group. This is what the letter says. Dear Metzger, I have your letter of the 13th of December and reject all you have put forward regarding more cooperation with me. Thinking I could help you was a mistake. In trying, I have done myself little honor and earned a great deal of damage. Next. You should have been content with the amount of interest and helpfulness the other students were given. It was your duty to see you did not exceed this, and I did not realize the implications, the injustices I was doing, and the havoc I was performing while I was being kind to you. My energies are dreaded to retrieving the devastation, etc. This was a hard blow to Gustav Metzger. As mentioned, Bomberg was a bit of a father figure, and even in the following years and all through the years, Gustav Metzger always spoke positively about Bomberg. This is what he said to Hans-Ulrich Obrist at an occasion. Bomberg wanted too special a place for himself and his family, which wasn't right in the exhibition, that is. I had decided that the Borough Group would try to put him on the map, but as the meetings proceeded and as we formed the constitution, I realized that he, in an extraordinary egotistical manner, was trying to dominate the group to an extent that I could no longer accept. So I resigned, though even then I said, look, I'm resigning from the group, but that doesn't mean I don't want to continue supporting you. And that was basically the attitude that Gustav Metzger showed through the years. Gustav had already by then moved to a remote seaside town in Norfolk called King's Lynn. There is little sign of any art being made during those first years, even though I have noted somewhere that some of his drawings have been dated by other people to 1953, but that is very unlikely. But anyhow, what he soon found a place, this house, because he had started living from selling and buying bric-a-brac and books from a stand on the local market. Soon he started to run his own shop from the bottom floor of his apartment, which worked as a sort of shop window and later his studio. Next. Oh, sorry. Next again. And the next. And the next. Instead, by the end of the 1950s, Metzger became engaged in preserving the local town center. His campaign, which ultimately failed its purpose, gave him experience in grassroots activism, which led him to an engagement in the anti-nuclear weapons movement in the following years. Next. So some years ahead, after moving to London again, he soon took part in various organizations and in the famous marches from London to the military and nuclear site Aldermaston. Next. He also became an informal secretary of the Committee of 100, an organization led by Bertrand Russell and the Reverend Michael Scott. This will be further developed by Daniella in her lecture. Next. I'm pretty convinced that Metzger was involved in designing this particular pamphlet, Act or Perish, as its layout closely resembles his own later manifestos. This was also the title of his retrospective. Okay, jumping a few years back in time, a significant impulse to find a new direction for his art came from the legendary exhibition This is Tomorrow at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in 1956. Not only the 6 different posters for the exhibition, all designed by artists, impressed, to the point that Metzger covered all the windows of his shop front in King's Lynn with them. Next. Okay, that's the posters. And next. The art was different from anything he had seen or learned during his years studying. It was collective manifestations, often with no distinction between the individuals involved, and it even included aspects of deconstruction, even destruction. Next. This is just a superficial resemblance of his later acid paintings, but anyhow, there were a lot of expressions that were new to Gustav at this point. And clearly it inspired him to a new start in his own art practice. For instance, these drawings that are, I am sure, dated to the late 50s, where he is really putting an emphasis on movement and speed, realizing the ideas that he had already during his studies for Bomberg. Next. Yeah, that's the image. And the next. So these are examples of his work in the late 50s, ink and pastel works, performed with, as it seems, extreme speed. It's a beautiful series of works that I hope are exhibited at Benuri right now. Next. And the next again. This is how Gustav Metzger remembers his development. I was painting on board, essentially, rather than canvas, with a palette knife for 2 or 3 years, but it wasn't hard enough. So I realized I must buy some metal. I bought 3 sheets of metal, quite big, and they looked grey, of course. Then I took my palette knife and painted. While painting, I would inevitably incise the metal. For the first time, I had a kinetic element in my art, and kinetics became so important. Next. So this is his famous painting on galvanized steel, one of 3 that were later shown in a basement gallery in London. Next. This other work has been shown, I think, in exhibitions. It was a sheet of plastic we found among his collections of works. But unfortunately, Gustav himself at that point could not remember whether it was a work or not. So there's a bit of uncertainty around whether this actually is an artwork. It certainly looks like one and would actually fit with the practice he was developing during those years. And also the fact that he is obviously working on a found object here. Next. So in Gustav's first exhibition in London at the basement gallery at the number 14 Monmouth Street, which was combining as a cafe artist run by a fellow artist. This was printed in the release for the exhibition. Gustav Metzger paints the world as it is seen under the influence of speed. Speed has a curious effect on objects. It draws them out, distorting their shape and mingling them with their neighbors, throwing into relief certain aspects of their form and causing other elements to vanish altogether. It fuses colors together so that only the most powerful retain their original identity, while the rest combine to produce broken, confused patches in which tone is all important and hue is only secondary. All these visual phenomena arising from speed are reproduced in Metzger's paintings and determine his style. So yet again, the importance of speed and immediacy is essential in his work at this point, as it was in theory already in his early works. Next. The same year, Metzger makes a second appearance at the number 14 Monmouth Street Gallery with a surprising move, introducing his own kind of ready-made art. In fact, he would not have approved of the term ready-made, where the focus is too much on the object transformed into art. As we will soon see, it is more about perceiving the totality of the world as art, moving from the object to the perception. It is above all a form of art where the artist has very little influence over the form, color, expression of the work or material. It is preferably, and in this case, made industrially, and the artist has at the most selected and arranged the objects, as Gustav writes himself. Next. So this is how he was presented in the newspapers. Bearded man trips over a box and finds a new form of art. It's pictures from packing cases. Of course, there's an aspect of ridicule in this Daily Express article, but at the same time, it's one of the first articles on Gustav Metzger we have. And I think he was sort of pretty happy about it. It also brought him out in a more public awareness or presence. Next. With this exhibition, Metzger introduces a written handout, including a manifesto not referring primarily to the actual work on display, but to the art to come. The introduction of the cardboards is often overseen, as the first autodestructive manifesto steals most of the attention. The header says, cardboards selected and arranged by Gustav Metzger at number 14 Monmouth Street, London, near Cambridge Circus. Next. This is what it says. The discarded cardboard, which is on view, was probably part of a television package. These cardboards are nature unadulterated by commercial considerations or the demands of the contemporary drawing room. They have reference to the greatest qualities in modern painting, sculpture, and architecture. These cardboards were made automatically for a strict purpose and for temporary usage. Next. And this is the manifesto attached. This is a different copy which also includes Gustav's handwritten addition at the bottom. Next. So to quote from this manifesto, autodestructive art can be machine produced and factory assembled. Autodestructive paintings, sculptures, and constructions have a lifetime varying from a few moments to 20 years. When the disintegrative process is complete, the work is to be removed from the site and scrapped. So yet again, his emphasis on machine production and factory assemblance in some indirectly references to the cardboards and to that sort of found objects perceived as with the eyes of an artist as art. Next. This manifesto leads to what Metzger labeled as his lecture demonstrations, which was certainly a precursor of today's lecture performances, a rather popular genre these days. The first one took place at Temple Gallery. The first lecture demonstration took place at Temple Gallery in London in June 1960. You can see several features that would appear again over and over in Gustav's work, like the newspapers pinned to the wall, which were to be used in many different ways throughout his lifetime. While the chaotic metal rods is an example of randomly created spatial form. Those are the objects on the table behind him. And it also included a model for an autodestructive monument, in this case made from office staples, but intended to be in monumental scale, and not the least, a garbage bag hanging from the ceiling, as you can see on Metzger's left. Next. At this occasion, Metzger also made his first acid painting demonstration. Gustav Metzger, in this image, he's doing the preparations for it. When realized, he performed the acid painting demonstration behind a glass sheet, as in this reconstruction from 2005. I think it's important also to note that it's not really the action which is essential in his work, but the actual melting on the surface of the plastic. I think very often we focus so much on the image of the artist, which is quite iconic, spraying or painting with acid, while Gustav was much more interested in the process happening on the actual canvas or the sheet of plastic. Next. No, there you have the reconstruction, sorry. Next again. This is what Gustav writes about this model for an autodestructive monument from 1960. It was by working on the first model that some clarity began to emerge. That sculpture would begin, like the cardboards, as a statement about ultimate abstract form and the beauty and perhaps also terror inherent in the machine product, and then imperceptibly in time turns into something that is the opposite of the starting point. Rust appears, soiling the abstraction. Then ragged holes emerge, grow unpredictably at the different parts of the structure. The sculpture increasingly takes on the characteristics of chaos and disorder of the found bags. Finally, all that will remain are the piles of fallen metal and collapsed girders, ready for the scrap heap, or to be shoveled into rubbish bags. And yet again, the rubbish bags occur over and over in his musings during these years. Next. Okay, that's the text again. Next. Around the time of the cardboard exhibition, Gustav writes in a text released a few years later, Gustav Metzger had come across other fascinating found objects. These were the clear polythene bags outside premises in Soho. They were the rubbish bags from shops, businesses, and clothing manufacturers. He collected the ones with paper and textile fragments and took them back to Camberwell, to where Gustav Metzger had moved from Chelsea. The random association of form, color, and texture had a deep appeal and seemed to be significant. But how to understand the appeal and significance? So yet again, it's interesting to see how this seemingly marginal work keeps appearing in his own writings during those years. Next. Yet again, you see the waste bag, the plastic bag with the garbage behind him. Next again. The cardboard containers, wooden boxes, transparent bags filled with paper and cloth cuttings, filled rubbish bins and other unpredictable objects that materialize on the pavements of Soho in the afternoon and evenings. They are among the most significant aesthetic realistic experiences available to us. They are best seen on the site in the few hours before their removal by the council wagon. Many of these arrangements cannot be fixed and would lose most of their point in so treated. This is our folk art. It has unaffected decoration, a feeling of relaxation, balance, sometimes tension and horror. So yet again, the bags appear, and I would say that these are crucial because they are works, these are objects that where his wish to create an art where the artist has a very little hand in their expression. So it's a way of allowing random processes to have a manifestation in his own art. And this is something that transpires throughout his career in many different ways. Next. And this is another comment. The cardboards and the rubbish bag are in equal measure the product of human endeavor. The bags showed the significance and beauty that can reside in chance. This understanding led to the acceptance of the potential and the validity of chance activity in the collapsing moment. It was the acceptance of the totality of the possible experience from the severely ordered to the utter displacement of that coherence that opened a path into the further development of theory, leading to the first demonstration of autodestructive art, the acid nylon paintings. With this, Metzger gives precedence to the garbage bags in the development towards the acid painting demonstrations. Next. So here you have this iconic image again. And yet again, it is a random process happening on the canvas rather than the actions of the artist that are interesting. And it could be noted that also that in later reenactments of this, Gustav was never performing himself, but always having other people to perform the action. Next. So he continued to write manifestos, and this is the manifesto published at the occasion of his South Bank demonstration. And I would quote again, from this third manifest, as you can see, he actually reprinted both the previous manifests and then added this autodestructive art, machine art, and autocreative art. This is what it states. Each visible fact absolutely expresses its reality. Certain machine-produced forms are the most perfect forms of our period. In the evening, some of the finest works of art produced now are dumped on the streets of Soho. Autocreative art is art of change, growth, and movement. Okay, next. I think I have doubled this one, but as Astrid Baron writes, the manifesto is significant as for the first time, it directly positioned autodestructive art as a critique of the capitalist system. This brief manifesto does not give much detail, but yet again returns to the possibly surprising emphasis on the garbage bags found in Soho. These random expressions of intentions originally unrelated to artistic ideas seem here to connect to machine art more than to autocreative art, or rather, they seem to represent a hybrid form, neither exactly autodestructive nor autocreative. What interests him is the fact that the creation of these bags is literally out of the hands of the artist. Next. This is what Gustav Metzger yet again writes. Autodestructive art is a radical, irrevocable change of image. Ideally, autodestructive art is produced and assembled in factories, the artist's relation to the work being analogous to that of the architect vis-a-vis his building. Autodestructive art is public art. It has connections with ritual art of the past. It should be placed where it can be seen by masses of people in the open or inside buildings. Next. So with these ideas about a random creation of images and allowing chance to enter the realm of art, Gustav Metzger started processes that would lead to, for instance, his liquid crystal projections from the later 60s that were also part of his lecture demonstrations. Next. Or like here, his engagement with computer art, with 5 screens with computer from 1969, a monumental piece that was planned to auto-destruct over a period of several years. He edited a computer magazine for several years, and typically for Gustav Metzger, he never actually worked with computers himself, but he was a master in utilizing other people's knowledge in his art. So in that way, he was very much a modern or contemporary artist. This this manifesto yet again relates to these processes. The Manifesto World, published on the Festival of Misfits in 1962. This is what it says. Nature imitates art. New realism, it was a necessary step toward the next development of art. The world in its totality as work of art, including sound, newspapers. New realism shows the importance of one object or relationship between a number of objects. This obviously is a first step to a large human figure, to a large ensemble, the total relationship of objects, including the human figure. And then, you stinking, fucking, cigar-smoking bastards, and you scented fashionable cows who deal in works of art. This is the Gustav at his most angry, and also displaying his anger at the gallery system and the commercialism enveloping art at his time and today. Next. Okay, that is the Manifesto World. Next again. There you have the text. Next. And next image, please. Yeah, so in this, from later in the 70s and part of a more technology-oriented exhibition of his, the Mika cubes yet again show how he worked with a sort of randomized process and probably not a little reminiscent of the glittering of plastic bags in Soho. These flakes of mica are moving with the help of stream of air in these plastic cubes. Next. And yet again, the newspaperworks is another aspect of random processes introduced, sometimes with the help of audience, sometimes just using series of pages or pin-up attachments to the newspapers to produce sort of artworks where he has very little influence on the actual details of the work. And finally, not so finally, you have the dancing tubes. Yet again, a work where which I know that Gustav loved a lot, where you can enjoy the movement of two plastic tubes moved by the help of compressed air. We were happy enough also to reproduce this work in the retrospective. And now, finally, one of his very late works was these light drawings produced with a lamp on photographic paper. Yet again, random processes where the outcome is a form of beauty, maybe also terror, as he emphasizes himself, and certainly a work where the audience, where the artist is as much the creator as the audience itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pontus, for a fascinating talk. There were so many things there that I'm sure the panel will want to unpack later, the links to computers in our age, to the rubbish, the recycling, and then right back at the beginning, that link through Bomberg right back to the futurists. So absolutely fascinating. Thank you. We move now to Daniella Perez, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Daniella to you. She is Deputy Artistic Director at Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, and in 2015 she curated the exhibition We Must Become Idealists or Die, Gustav Metzger, at UMEX Museum. She's been awarded 2 curatorial grants from the Foundation for the Arts Initiatives, most recently in 2020, and was part of the curatorial team of the 9th Mercosul Biennial in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2013. She was co-founder of De Sitio, a platform that conceptualized, developed, and promoted contemporary art projects. And between 2007 and 2011, she was associate curator at Museo Tamayo. She's also a writer, an art school teacher, and has studied art history in Mexico City and has an MA in curating contemporary art from London's Royal College of Art. So over to you, Daniella.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'd just like to make a small comment. I did work as deputy director at Museo Tamayo and finished my time there in 2017. Since 2019, I am working as curator in Fundación Transformación Arte y Educación, that is TAE Foundation, based in Mérida, Yucatán. Just to update the bio a little bit. Well, good evening to all. Thank you, Nikki, Liane, and of course, the Ben-Nuri Gallery Museum for this invitation. It is certainly my pleasure and of course, an honor to share, even if it's a tiny fragment of the vast inspirational landscape behind Gustav Metzger's work, his acts, and his constant and very deep reflections, his accomplishments and his legacy as an artist, an activist, and as an individual who operated in the same manner privately and publicly can only lead to a fruitful conversation today, particularly too, in regards to ecology and activism, and of course guided by Pontus and his great knowledge and closeness to Gustav Metzger. as it is somehow being said already in different words maybe. And here I'm going to share also a couple of images with all of you. Gustav Metzger's public and personal life project involved leading a path that could amplify our potential as society towards common good. With no doubt, Metzger's political activities were integral to his artistic concerns and became both the matter and the method he selected to issue alert signs on limits that society reached once and again. In particular, I'd like to underline for anyone who perhaps has not encountered or come across Metzger through his use of language in multiple written forms or through spoken means, his outstanding capacity to articulate and raise a voice that spoke to all equally and in quite embracing ways. Very personally speaking, to me, this has generated some sort of positive obsession, I must confess. The different types of material, sources, essays, interviews, publications, flyers, manifestos, as Pontus brought up, conferences and symposiums, as well as press releases, all form part of booklets, posters, distribution campaigns, and so on, generated by Metzger, who was clearly aware of all the roles that each of these different printed materials can have, as well as different platforms, in terms of the contribution, specifically speaking, to his activist, political, and artistic goals and intentions. And perhaps the obsession that I'm trying to convey here, or at least a personal one, comes from the fact that there always seems to be not only deep profoundness in Metzger's ideas, but also there seems to be one more piece in this endless puzzle of alternatives that he generously and very proactively offered society. So what I mean to say is basically that one can never stop doing research or somehow doing research and getting close and more proximate to Gustav Metzger's different types of materials. I thought that one of the best ways to participate tonight is literally by sharing a transcript from an audio recording of a project that Gustav Metzger would have wanted to realize in the later part of his life. Sorry, these images should have come. The Domes project, as we have referred to it for quite a while, was basically an idea that contains many key concepts that he manifested along the years, including the activation of long-term spaces for social change. The project suggested by Gustav resulted from a series of conversations and a proposal to conceive an exhibition project in Mexico that could attempt to support his work by addressing the boundless space that his ideas occupied and literally taking them to other dimensions beyond the gallery presentation format, of course. So this image that you see here was just the title of the show. It's obviously a phrase that comes from Gustav: "We must become idealists or die." So this is what, this is what Gustav shared with me in November of 2012. And here I quote: "It seems to me that with the potential of the organization," we referring specifically to Jumex Foundation and Museum in Mexico, "one can do something substantial that can represent a contribution. We could build a dome, a round installation, one dome in Mexico City or nearby, and then 4 or 5 smaller domes in the country. We should allow entrance, not with money, but with some symbolic action of fighting extinction and saving species." This project is mainly intended for schools, children, and young people who would be invited to contribute, for example, by saving plants in the area. We give tickets to enter these beautiful liquid crystal experiences. It is a 10-year project. The foundation builds it, organizes it, and pays the staff. The idea is to show films, liquid crystals, of course, and look after it. Since the aim of this is nationwide, it means that my work, in a larger sense, is distributed rather than only in one center. I can see so many advantages. If you adapt this project, other places can possibly pick it up. It is only good to have more liquid crystals, one of the healthiest experiences you can have. Children can touch the screen, dance there, and we are getting out of the galleries, which is a very key concept, going into daily life and interacting there. It would be a major development. When the 10 years are over, the domes can be dismantled and used again for something else. Land is very expensive. We may not only have these domes in big cities, but more spread out. It is not fair to have only one. We should build smaller ones outside of the big city, responding to the potential use. What I have said in principle is that we do the work in relation to the environment, and it goes beyond one specific artwork. A team of people researching, representing different disciplines, working for several months, can suggest the regions with the maximum benefit, and that's where we go with the domes. The size of the domes depends on different factors we must consider. This is how, from the very beginning, I felt that art should go. Artists should integrate technical and social potential through arts, and it was never fully done. I think this approach could be fully enacted, and we see what happens. I think it is not only for artistic purposes, which is another key demand I've put on art and on myself. Creating art for the community, continuing to test what is really significant. Again and again, there was a time when the situation called to fight nuclear weapons, and then extinction and ecology came and addressed the problems. At this stage here, with the aid of the foundation, if you could realize it fully, and not only talking about it as an idea, first in models and work out the cost in terms of finance and in terms of pollution and degradation of the environment, against a very engagement with nature, people could use it to spend time in nature. The domes integrating nature with public life. The future of the world is what we're after. We start with the young, and then when the young are 12, 15, and 21, they can enter politics. And if they have got this initiation or introduction to key issues from when they were 7 years old, it will make an enormous difference to the future of the world. So we are now going right out of the galleries, which was the starting point of some of my work, to actually realize these potentials and necessities. These are necessities to introduce the young to taking responsibility. By giving them free entrance to liquid crystals as a response to their actions, we're not just trying for them to do something, we're telling them, do something, and we will give you a beautiful time. And they can keep coming back. If they go once, that does not stop them from coming again. If they continue to produce and contribute to the fight against extinction, they can come back again for as long as they want. We can also use the dome to interact and show films, concerts, not only liquid crystals, they're multifunctional. And then after the 10 years, they can be used as factories or storage facilities, schools, or taken down and used to build houses. Readapt and reuse. When autodestructive energies complete the work is when we move aside and the site is reused. There are many questions that have to be considered. We must find an efficient way of doing this. Indeed, and I finished the quote here. This project became one more unrealized project that, even if it was not carried out as he or Gustav would have imagined so, it did unfold into certain spheres and it impacted different groups, including students from MIT lab that signed up to a semester course where they made prototypes for these domes. I'll share a couple of images from that time. These were two semesters where this course was taught at MIT. It was called Prototyping Gustav Metzger's Domes on Extinction, One-Person Gestures. Here again, the students working on their presentations. And finally this. One of the many fascinating things of the Domes project is the fact that it visualizes long-term compromise and commitment, as well as collaboration. I personally understand it today as an alternate social pedagogy form of growing responsibility that establishes a path of ethics into aesthetics, which was something that Gustav definitely emphasized once and again. This project additionally demonstrates the intrinsic threat in the technologies we ourselves develop and over which we have lost control. Through the interdependence between autodestructive, a dome that lasts basically 10 years, and auto-creative art, the liquid crystals that go or are inside it, encourage reflection about the role of humanity in the disintegration of nature. Our actions lead to changes in our environment that, even when they're not immediately visible, impact nature in the long run. So perhaps some of the several questions that Gustav did leave open, not only through this proposal, but in relation to all of his work, are some of the following that I would like to share with you. What is the visible and the invisible impact of losing a species? What challenges do we face when trying to control the natural world? How can we generate and articulate a plan of action that inspires and that looks out for the environment and survival of the species in it? In 1972, Gustav Metzger encouraged artists to join the Artists' Union and served as its deputy chairperson. Around that same time, Metzger conceived Mobile in 1970, a couple of years before. One of several works reactivated for the exhibition that we did present in Mexico, We Must Become Idealists or Die at the Humex Museum. In 2015, Mobile was originally presented outside the Hayward, Mobile was originally presented in the Hayward Gallery in London as a response to the fact that he was not invited to participate in the exhibition Kinetics, which was taking place there. This image here that we see is from the Humex Museum, or from the show that we try to amplify and go beyond the spaces of the gallery walls. So the work, as you can see, consisted of a car with a plexiglass box filled with the top of it, which was connected to the car's exhaust pipe through a hose. The box contained vegetation that over time would decay and die. The car was driven through different areas, originally in Waterloo Bridge and Bond Street in London, and remained parked in various streets. Mobile will later develop into Carva, which Pontus referred to as part of a proposal for Documentify. It consisted of 4 cars that, in a similar fashion, had a hose that connected the car's escape pipes to a large cube-shaped plastic container, although the project was not realized for Documenta. Another version of this project, here I have an image, Stockholm, June, with 120 cars connected to a large acrylic container, was attempted but not completed. It was not until 2007 that the Sharjah Biennial was able to realize the first phase of this project of Stockholm June, and they successfully executed it. The second phase of this work, which consisted basically on the explosion of the plastic container as a result of the concentration of the toxic gases produced by the cars, remains unrealized. Metzger's radical posture against certain technological advances, such as the use of cars and airplanes, can be linked to an experience he had in 1951. I will begin a quote here again. I went on a 3-month trip that took me right up to Scotland. I had lived in London and wanted to get away from there. The Shetland Islands were a very peaceful place in those days. There were no cars. They were not allowed, except for a few that had to be brought over by ship. There was a calm there that I had never experienced before. At the time, I kept a diary. And during this time, I wrote down things that were important to me. One of these ideas was that cars had to go. That was a breakthrough for me. It was quite extreme. They have to go. I thought a lot about the destruction caused by cars, the destruction of the human environment, of nature. It was an obsession. That was the start of my deliberate, politically consistent opposition to technology. End of quote. So Gustav's confidence in the political power of art led him to conceive projects that, although they are not necessarily, or not all of them, denominated as art, they use a platform as a point of departure for different campaigns. The domes that Metzger did propose to be developed in Mexico, in addition to being an inspirational project, they would provide an alternate form of future-minded pedagogy, as I said, that would function through art and require, of course, the participation of people, and especially of children from several different generations as agents for change. The future is the main objective of that project. From within different disciplines, we could generate something meaningful to gain back the right that we have stolen from ourselves to participate, to see, to know, react, and reformulate different ways of living and prevent the destructive power of society to prevail. In an interview that Liane and Ulla Dagerling published in the book that accompanied the exhibition project in Mexico, Gustav mentions, art's role is to support human endeavor, and it should be encouraged to do that. Art can help because without it, we are nowhere at all. Art includes every manifestation of creativity, whether it is music or words or kinetic art, and that can help, if only to calm us down and put us into a peaceful and responsive state of mind. Art is everything. For me, it has been since the beginning of my life. Not only can art cause change, art must cause change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniella. Again, so much to unpack from that talk and so prescient and relevant to now. I'm now going to hand over for the last part of the evening to Nicola and Liane, who are going to put questions to both our speakers. Sorry, you couldn't see me there. To put questions to both our speakers and then to take any Q&A and observations from the audience at the end. So over to you, Nicola and Liane.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Pontus and Daniella for such fascinating and thought-provoking presentations. As Sarah mentioned, we're just going to have a discussion here before we move on to see if there are any questions from through the chat from the audience. So I just thought I'd start off with one question for both speakers. What led you to work with Metzger and curate his work? I mean, Pontus, you touched on this a bit at the beginning of your talk, but I wondered if you could expand on that, and I'd love to hear Daniella's thoughts as well.
I would say that it was I fell in love with this work, and also it was such a peculiar situation where we met. So this is a rather romantic narrative of meeting an artist that fascinated from the very start, because I had never heard of Gustav in 2002, and like most people outside of England, and in fact most people in Britain as well, had not heard much of Gustav Metzger at that time. I just instantly realized that this was a fantastic artist with who had produced these incredible works through the years, and who also touched on so many topics that were of importance at the time. And if we say 2002, maybe environmental issues were not as present in the discussion then, even though there was, of course, an awareness. And activism was not yet really on the artistic agenda, even though you could probably see it coming somehow. But you could see that Gustav was embodying all these tendencies that were actual and also coming through in the years ahead. So in a way, I just felt this immense attraction to his work from the very first moment. And I need also to say that it wasn't easy to work with Gustav, particularly not at that time, because Gustav had no one there to help him. And he always told, and he didn't have a telephone, so you couldn't call him, and of course no fax machine, no way, no computer, nothing, and no means of communicating except by letter. But Gustav had a letterbox in town because he didn't want to use his own front door letterbox for some reason. Unfortunately, he never emptied that box, so it was really like a dead end. So you really had to go to London every time you wanted to discuss something with him, and knock his door and tell him that you were there. And
Wow.
then you could agree on a meeting, never inside his house, but somewhere else. So it was really like in those years, Gustav was very much more a recluse than he was in later years, when he had these fantastic people, Liane and Ulla and others around him who were sort of helping him and organizing his work, because everything was a bit ad hoc, and you were very happy if he called you on the day that you had agreed on, 2 weeks later or something. But I mean, because there was always, if the weather was cold and horrible, he might not go out to a phone booth or a cafe to make this call to Sweden. So organizing an exhibition with him was really, first of all, getting in touch with him was hard. And then organizing an exhibition was really a super challenge. And then also, Gustav never produced any drawings at that time. He hardly put a pen to a paper. It was really hard to make him sign an agreement or anything like it. So it was really, everything had to be developed through conversations, and conversations were immensely difficult to have, especially if you live in different countries. So that was really a fantastic challenge. And at some point when we were making this show in Lund, Gustav got upset for some reason and called me and wanted to cancel everything, and unless I sorted out the problem. So he was really sometimes a bit tricky, not a diva, but sensitive for perhaps the lack of payment or something like it, and then you really have to hurry to fix the problem, otherwise there wouldn't be anything.
Oh wow, how interesting. Daniella, did you want to come in on that as well? Just need to unmute.
I would agree with Pontus 100%. I met him in a very different way, but also definitely as soon as I started to get to know his work, I also would say I fell in love with it, definitely. I studied at the Royal College of Art in 2000. I started studying in 2005, and I would see him around almost everywhere I went. That is how I learned about the character, not necessarily about his work. And a couple of years later, after finishing the MA, I came back to Mexico and worked on a series of proposals for the Tamayo Museum during my first phase there. And eventually, I think there was maybe this relates to a comment that I made earlier about my obsession, or I think everyone's obsession with Gustav material. I didn't ever feel like I was ready to present the final proposal for the project or even contact Gustav. I felt there was always so much more to learn that I just kept working on paper, basically. Eventually, I left the museum several years later. And when I had left the museum without the show, the Tamayo Museum, without the show actually happening, I was contacted by that director then of the Jumex Museum in Mexico, who knew I had been developing that research project or that proposal, and said he was very interested in Gustav's work and basically wanted me to do the show at the Jumex Museum. But what would be our surprise to finally encounter and meet Gustav and learn that not only was he aware of the fact that the proposal could be quite productive, but that he wanted to add something else into this conversation, which was one of his most ambitious ideas, I would say, because basically, I have it here, it's a quote from Manifesto World. It says, "My ultimate object is to include everything in a single work. In the end, the only medium it will be possible to say everything will be reality." And I think that relates so much to the Domes project. But anyhow, yeah, well, I finally met Gustav thanks to Liane and to Ulla. It was also very, when I finally met him, it was a very intense period in his life because he was not doing very well. And we met literally at the hospital. And from there, we continued our conversations for a long time, ups and downs in terms of health. But it was a very, very productive conversation that, like Pontus shares with everyone tonight, was also for me very congruent to the questions that he had and brought up in our very first encounters, asking what was Jumex Museum, where did the money come from, the family, how would they be engaged in this project, like conversations that were quite delicate, but also very important because I guess it followed a line of thought that he had been pursuing for so long. And eventually in his later years, he did open up to a couple of other possibilities, but it was important to keep true to himself and to his ideas. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so am I right in thinking that the Domes project was not realized?
The Domes project was not realized. We organized an amazing think tank with around 15 people in Mexico that I admire profoundly, and that I thought I needed these allies. As we all know, unfortunately, art institutions, it's very hard to compromise in the long term. And even, exhibitions happen and they're temporarily, and sometimes they take quite a while to configure them, let's say. But this meant a lot of resources, and not only that, it meant land and having someone donate it for a while or temporarily. The Jumex Museum was interested at the moment, but I also felt like it was something that was left pretty much, that both Gustav and the museum left in my hands. So it was a great honor in a way, but also a great responsibility. So what happened after those series of think tanks was that someone who was there was quite moved by the project and was very interested, and later went to teach at MIT. That is how the project became a workshop or a lab at MIT during 2 semesters. And of course, we meant to continue that. but we were left, as many of other Gustav's projects, as an unrealized project that I think has a lot of the potential to be fulfilled in many ways, even now.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually, if you could elaborate a bit more on that MIT course. That sounds fascinating, and you know what it involved, and it seems to be so in the spirit of, you know, Gustav collaborating with other people.
Yeah, Gustav collaborated a lot with different students, universities, and of course the AA was not the exception. So when we started discussing this possibility, and then the workshop came about, it was a group of students that worked mainly in relation to architecture and biology, like a very mixed profile. So we thought it was a perfect space to launch this. And it was very interesting. They came up with amazing proposals. It was also something that basically happened with the person that was in charge of the group, and I was on the side following those conversations. And we try to keep Gustav up to date. During those times, it was a little bit hard to do so. But still, he was aware of the fact that we were working on that. And yeah, it was successful to the point that it repeated another term. And then eventually there were changes at MIT, and it just dissolved. But I would like to think that there were other impacts of all of these unrealized projects, not only of this one. No? As ideas, as models, as maquettes or drawings, they are projects that, you know, you get to learn about them, and basically they seem to have quite an effect, even if they are not out there in the public sphere.
Leanne, did you have any thoughts or questions at this point?
Well, I was actually going to ask both of you as well, just how you think that Gustav's early experiences or initiatives, I guess you could call them, in terms of recycling, reusing, for example, with the garbage bags and the textiles and the paper and the cardboards that Pontus mentioned. How did those kind of early initiatives connect to his later engagement with ecology and his fight against extinction in your mind? I mean, it's obviously a connection, but, you know, do you feel that was a kind of constant thread through his work? How do you see the two as being connected? Oh.
Pontus, we can't hear you.
No, you're still muted, actually.
Okay. Now.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. I think that, I mean, Gustav was consistent in so many ways, but at the same time, time changes, and his career spans, I mean, so many years. It's half a decade and more. Is it 60 years of artistic practice? So it's really such a long time span. So you could say that his engagement originally was primarily against nuclear arms and such. And at that time, his ideas of the garbage bags were more about, first of all, finding an expression that wasn't like commercialized and absorbed by this the gallery system, and so he tried to escape all those sort of traps that make artists within quotation marks. So he wanted to do something else, and he was also living in a time where a lot of other artists were actually pursuing similar ideas. So I think the garbage bags, for instance, they had a much more aesthetic framing from the beginning, and also maybe the idea of not creating anything new when so many things already existed. So maybe that has a sort of a seed to an environmentalist conviction. But I mean, he had those ideals already, and he changed, of course, with time. I mean, so with the discussions appearing in society also his ideas transformed. So it's still just like all of us keep changing over time. So he was true to his expression, but it was differently framed over time. That would probably be my conclusion.
I actually agree with that. And I also think that perhaps to a certain point, it's important to contextualize each of those actions or ideas. But to another extent, it's also important to not necessarily categorize them as anything. And that's why, I mean, at least I personally felt it was important, at least in the show that we organized in Mexico, to include from, you know, like different word notes that I found or conversations that I had. And I learned that Gustav was interested in even, you know, placing a box for recycling batteries. So we did that all along the exhibition, in the exhibition space. Outside of the exhibition space, we did it as well. We brought into a symposium that we organized a flyer. We brought it back, let's say, a flyer that he had already designed at some point that highlighted the question, what do you eat, you know? So I think it was important to just bring it out into a larger frame, let's say, even as Pontus mentions, many changes occur over time, because these were things that he was genuinely interested in. And for that reason, I felt it was true to reactivate as well, even a work like the Reduce Art Flight campaign. His show coincided with a couple of events here in Mexico, and we redid that poster as well at some point. So it was important to both go outside the gallery space, but also to bring these ideas from different moments and in different contexts that had represented something else in the past, but represented definitely something still true to his ideals today, or well, 10 years ago already.
Just following on from that, I had a quick question about that slide that you showed, Daniela, with those 3 questions about the environment and extinction and things. Did you say those were questions that Metzger had posed?
You know, I kept finding questions everywhere. You know, he was always underlining very interesting things and ideas. And these were just a couple of questions that I decided today to edit and bring forward to share with all of you, because I felt it had a lot to do with some of the ideas that we're sharing in terms of the Domes project in particular, no? And of course, in relation to environment and activism.
Yeah. I was sort of wondering if those questions had sort of garnered any responses, or, you know, because they were quite thought-provoking and obviously very pertinent.
Well, I guess these are the questions that surround the basis of his practice in a way, no? These and many others. And they were responded, I would say, through all his actions and his writings and his presentations and lectures and non-material artworks, no? Definitely. In all ways of being.
I would just
have sorry, I was just wondering if you had a last question before I wrap up, because it's nearing.
Yeah, it is nearing the end, yes. Well, I was just going to say, and basically respond back to what Daniela was just talking about in terms of looking back at moments in time of Gustav's practice and life and experiences. And I think that was one of the really interesting elements of his practice. Actually, he constantly and consistently referred back to the past. You know, he looked back at projects, not radically changing them, but kind of, as Daniela mentioned, kind of bringing them to a new context or a new light, but in that way ensuring that they didn't just kind of fade away. So the Reduce Art Flights campaign, for example, which basically has been replicated many times in many places around the world. It still has relevance even today, obviously. But the fact is, he didn't just kind of leave things behind. He would refer back. He would bring them up again, even literally in how he worked in terms of producing works for exhibitions. You know, he would reuse materials if he could. He would, you know, remake works that were, you know, produced 20, 30, 40 years ago, because he just didn't necessarily want to kind of ship things around or start from scratch. And I like the fact that, yeah, it was always a consistent part of his art practice, that reuse. And so it comes across in terms of that general theme of, recycling as well, the recycling of ideas, but bringing them into a new light or the new context that we're faced with.
Yes.
So.
May I just add something? Because I made a wonderful interview in 2005, and I think it's basically unpublished in some way in my piles of stuff. But Gustav reflected on his project, never realized, for the Misfits exhibition in 1962 in London, where he had planned to paste newspaper pages on a wall in a gallery. And the Fluxus artists involved just thought that this was such a horrible and boring idea that they rejected the idea. And by coincidence, on the opening day, the Cuba Missile Crisis started. Actually, it would have been so central to a historical moment occurring that you would have been able to follow that event on the wall of the gallery. But and that's why later a recreation of that project appeared as sort of 2 pages from was it, well, a British newspaper. Anyhow, in that interview he said that it is the role of the artist to intuitively feel his time, to express. So he said that it was no coincidence in his mind that this actually happened at the same time. He meant that this was actually, it was part of what he sort of unconsciously was processing. But I mean, that might be an after construction, but nevertheless, he saw himself a little bit like a visionary and someone who could actually look into the future somehow through his art. And anyone who has listened to his conversations knows that he was actually almost, I would say that in a trance, like his conversations and his talks were never prepared in any formal way, but they were always very extremely inspired and so forth. So in that sense, he was actually had a mind that was much bigger than the space where he existed.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like we could go on, talking all evening, but I'm afraid we're gonna have to bring this evening to a close. And I'd just like to say thank you so much to Pontus and Daniella for such fascinating presentations, as well as to our colleagues Manai and Charlotte for the smooth running of the technical side, and also to you, our virtual audience. If you would like to hear the whole of this stimulating evening again, please do look out for the recording of this event, which will be released shortly on our website. Our next event takes place on 18th of August at 6 p.m. UK time. And then we will have independent writer and curator Brian Ferren, who will speak on the subject of visiting Wittgenstein's grave with Gustav Metzger. And she will address negation and its presence in post-war Jewish art and poetry as manifest in Metzger's work, contextualizing her discussion by considering other poets and artists of the post-war period. And then I'd just like to say, we also look forward to welcoming as many of you as possible to our physical gallery in St. John's Wood to view the exhibition of Gustav Metzger's early work currently on now. You can pre-book tickets online via our website, benuri.org. And please also visit our online iterations of the show. And also not to forget that we have also produced a catalogue to accompany the exhibition, which is priced at £20, and that is available to buy either in the gallery or on our website. So thank you again, everyone, and stay safe. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.